Across the globe, there are various and insane claims of paranormal activity. Alien hotspots, haunted locations, national parks where you might catch a glimpse of Bigfoot. Whether it's cryptids, aliens, or your run-of-the-mill poltergeist haunting, there is no one place where all of the craziness comes together. But what if there was? Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. There's a location in Utah that's like a magnet for spooky stuff. Legend has it that there are creepy humanoid creatures, ghosts, giant unkillable wolves, weird electronic glitches, strange portals to other dimensions, and UFOs. It's like an amusement park for all things paranormal, and it's called Skinwalker Ranch. In the heart of Utah, particularly in the northern reaches and the Uinta Basin, a phenomenon unfolds that has earned this region a reputation as one of the most active paranormal and supernatural hotspots on the planet. Here, beneath the expansive skies, everything from strange lights and floating orbs to strange creatures and floating craft have been sighted. This land bears witness to a long history of inexplicable occurrences, tracing its origins right back to the earliest days of human settlement. While the peculiar happenings are concentrated predominantly in and around the Uinta Basin, some folks believe that within this radius exists an epicentre, a focal point from which all these bizarre phenomena seem to manifest. This is no ordinary piece of land. It's a sprawling 512-acre ranch situated approximately 100 miles east of Salt Lake City. The Ute people, who have inhabited these lands for generations, hold a deep respect for this place. But not out of admiration. They regard this ranch as ground zero for a curse laid upon them by their Navajo neighbours. For generations, members of the Ute tribe have been strictly forbidden from setting foot on this land, believing it to be in the direct path of a skinwalker, a shape-shifting entity of unspeakable terror, which is why this place has become known to locals as Skinwalker Ranch. From 1934 to 1994, Skinwalker Ranch belonged to Kenneth and Edith Myers. Now, not much was known about their time there, even though they spent nearly 60 years on the ranch. Then, in 1987, for reasons nobody could figure out, they simply up and left. But in 1994, things changed. 7 years the ranch lay dormant until Terry and Gwen Sherman, along with their 2 kids, became the new owners. To them, it was like finding their dream home. The ranch was way out there, surrounded by green fields, wild woods, and a flowing creek. It had this peaceful vibe that the Shermans couldn't ignore. It really was a dream come true. Terry Sherman was a cattle breeder, and the thought of this place, well, this could be the ticket to making his cattle game even bigger. He got the ranch for a crazy good price, way cheaper than it should have been. When he signed the papers, he looked at those deeds like, well, they were his whole future. But little did he know at that point that this land would really mess with him. Not just money-wise, but it would take its toll physically, emotionally, and psychologically. When Terry and Gwen first checked out the ranch, they saw that the main house was falling apart, which, well, they kind of expected since it had been empty for so long. But what really surprised them was the astounding number of deadbolts locking up the place, not just on the front and back doors, but inside too, even the windows. They also found these heavy chains hooked to big metal hooks on the walls. It was pretty clear that they had been used to keep some serious guard dogs in check. Even though this gave them the creeps, Terry and Gwen just brushed it off. They figured that the old couple who owned it previously, well, they were just paranoid and overly protective. Another strange and unsettling factor was the list of unusual clauses in the real estate contract. One of them expressly said that Terry and Gwen could not dig on this land without getting the express permission from the previous owners. But why? I mean, the Shermans now own the land, right? Surely they could do whatever the hell they wanted with it. The family didn't pay much mind to all these oddities at first, but Terry couldn't help but wonder why they had gone to such lengths for security. Little did they know this beautiful land had more than just peaceful vibes. The weird stuff started happening almost right away. On their first day at their new place, as the Sherman family were busy unloading their truck in front of their fresh new home, something strange caught their eye on the far side of the pasture to the south. As this thing drew closer, well, they soon realised it was a wolf. Nothing strange about that, right? Well, hang on a wee minute. We're getting there. The animal was moving gracefully in a series of zigzags in the direction of the Sherman family. This made them instantly cautious, but it wasn't just the wolf's presence that gave them pause. When he compared it to the fence posts and bushes in the distance, it was clear that this wolf was easily 3 times bigger than a regular wolf. However, its behaviour was unexpectedly friendly. It didn't show any signs of aggression. Instead, it slowed down and eventually stopped about 50 yards away. The wolf sniffed the air and fixed its piercing blue eyes on the family before continuing its casual approach. It seemed completely tame, even wagging its tail as it drew closer. Terry's dad, who had been helping with the unloading, summoned up the courage to reach out and pet this massive creature. Terry Sr. was a towering figure, standing at over 6 feet tall, yet despite his imposing size, this wolf's head easily reached his shoulder. However, it soon became apparent that despite the wolf's intimidating size and appearance, it had absolutely no intentions of causing them harm. This put the rest of the family at ease, and they cautiously approached the unusual visitor. Terry had said that it's a possibility it was someone's pet, although who would keep an animal this size? It just seemed far too docile to be wild. But then another startling thought crossed Terry's mind as he glanced across about 60 feet to his left. See, that's where the corral was. He wondered if it had been a wise decision to move some of his herd onto the ranch so soon. Inside the pen, there were 4 of his prize breeding cows and just as many calves. They all appeared agitated, obviously, by the wolf's presence, except for one curious young calf that had stuck its head out between the metal bars to watch the unfolding scene. Almost as soon as Terry realised this potential danger, the wolf bounded across the short distance and clamped its massive jaws around the calf's head. The young cow bleated and thrashed wildly as the wolf tried to drag it through the fence and out of the pen. Terry grabbed an axe handle from the back of his truck and rushed over, beating the wolf's flanks and kicking at its hind legs. But the wolf, well, paid absolutely no attention and stubbornly held on. He shouted to his son to get his magnum. Now that is a big gun. His son dashed across to the truck, grabbed a .357 from the cab, and handed it to his father. Terry quickly fired a shot at the wolf's abdomen, the sound echoing across the empty pasture, but it had no discernible effect. The massive creature didn't even stagger, yelp, or flinch. It simply continued to savage the poor calf. In his desperation, Terry fired another shot, still with no effect. It was only after a 3rd shot rang out that the wolf slowly released its grip and backed off. It retreated about 10 feet. The rancher couldn't believe his eyes. It was nearly impossible for any creature to survive 3 shots from a .357 Magnum at such close range, but this wolf seemed completely unscathed. Not a drop of blood stained its coat. Frustrated and bewildered, he took a 4th shot, aiming straight for the wolf's heart. The creature retreated another 30 feet, but what really gave Terry the creeps was how it just stood there, looking utterly unbothered, as if it were deciding whether to attack the calf again. Terry sensed the weirdness and urgently told his son to grab his .30-06 rifle from the house. His son moved swiftly, and the wolf remained eerily motionless as Terry aimed the heavy firearm. In that moment, he almost felt a pang of sympathy for the poor beast. When he pulled the trigger, a deafening shot reverberated across the wilderness, and he knew he had hit his target. However, instead of collapsing, as it should have, the wolf just simply backed up another few steps and stared at Terry, who was growing increasingly unnerved. He quickly took another shot, and this time he saw a chunk of flesh detach from the animal. But even that didn't take it down. The wolf just calmly glanced back at Terry, then at the calf once again. It was almost like, for just a second, the huge creature was considering going for it again. But then it slowly turned away and trotted back across the field and into the woods in the same direction where it came from earlier. Terry was left dumbfounded, knowing that he couldn't allow such a formidable predator to stay on his land if he wanted to raise his cattle. He called out to his teenage son, and together they set off in pursuit of this mysterious wolf. They tracked the wolf for around half an hour, catching fleeting glimpses of it as it darted south between clumps of trees. Following the paw prints, they went through a cluster of trees and bushes, and on the other side was this creek. Emerging from the trees, they found themselves on a wide muddy bank. The wolf's tracks were clear, and they began to follow them, but then, strangely, the tracks abruptly ended about 40 yards from the water's edge. Terry and his son, well, they couldn't believe their eyes. They were standing on a vast, soggy mudflat, but the paw prints just simply vanished in the middle of the bank. The wolf would have had to disappear miraculously, covering an impossible 40 or 50 yards in either direction without leaving any more tracks. It felt like it had just vanished into thin air. Heading back to the homestead, Terry picked up the piece of flesh that he had torn from the animal. He noticed it didn't look fresh and bloody, but instead it appeared to be rotten, like it had been left out in the sun for days. Terry couldn't help but wonder what the hell just happened, and that was only the start of the strange encounters on the ranch. Over the following weeks, life at the homestead unfolded as usual, barring a series of peculiar incidents that seemed to revolve around Gwen. Initially, she chose not to mention these odd occurrences to her husband. Instead, she tried to make sense of it all, thinking that she was maybe just absent-minded. For instance, after returning from one of her shopping trips, Gwen would unpack her groceries and stow them away in the fridge and the relevant cupboards. However, just moments later, upon re-entering the kitchen, she would be confronted by the bewildering sight of all of the groceries neatly repacked into their bags. It was like the last 5 minutes had just been erased. In other instances, Gwen's daily routine was punctuated by unsettling disruptions. Her typical morning shower ritual involving locking the bathroom door, arranging her towel and hairbrush by the sink, well, that would end in another weird occurrence. Upon exiting the shower, she would discover that her towel and hairbrush had mysteriously vanished from the bathroom, only to reappear hours later in an entirely unrelated corner of the house. This disconcerting pattern persisted over an extended period. Gwen started to think that maybe she was just losing her marbles, or just maybe something else was going on. Everything took an even more surreal turn when Terry, one evening, stormed into the homestead, demanding to know the whereabouts of his post digger. See, he had been using it to mend a fence out in the pasture. He had put the heavy contraption down, turned to check out the posts and fence were straight, and when he turned back, the post digger was completely gone, vanished into thin air. There was no one else out in the pasture with him, and even if there were, there was no way that they could have collected the tool and hidden it or themselves without Terry noticing. Gwen, bewildered by the series of strange events, explained that she and her children had been inside the house all evening. She joined Terry in an earnest search for this missing tool, but their efforts proved futile. The post digger had inexplicably vanished without a trace. Several weeks later, a bizarre twist added to this mystery. The missing post digger was discovered suspended high in a tree on the far side of the ranch. I mean, we're talking 60 to 70 feet off the ground here. This discovery defied all logic, considering that the equipment itself weighed round about 70 pounds. At this juncture, the Shermans could no longer dismiss these events as mere coincidence, and suspicions began to settle in their own minds. Maybe their dream home had more going on than meets the eye. During this period, a nephew was staying with the Shermans. Terry saw it as the perfect chance to give the young lad a tour of the vast ranch, and his own son joined the expedition. It was well past sunset when they finished exploring and headed back to the homestead. A few hundred yards ahead, Terry spotted headlights moving along a distant fence line. He recognised those lights from before, assuming it was someone who had taken a wrong turn from the nearby East Road. However, seeing them again stirred suspicion. Terry considered the possibility that these individuals might be trespassing on his property for unknown reasons. Determined to confront the intruders, Terry began walking swiftly in their direction, with his son and nephew following closely nearby. As they picked up their pace, they noticed something odd: the absence of any engine noise. Their brisk walk turned into a jog, and their confusion only grew. They closed the gap to within 100 yards of the mysterious lights when a shocking turn of events left them speechless. The lights suddenly moved upwards from the ground and glided above distant treetops. Terry and the two boys came to an abrupt stop, overwhelmed by this inexplicable sight. In eerie silence, the lights continued their trajectory over before disappearing into the night. As the autumn season progressed, these strange lights became increasingly frequent, particularly as Terry began transporting his prized cattle onto the ranch. It seemed like the phenomenon would ramp up any time Terry brought livestock onto the ranch. As winter settled over the region, fierce snowstorms relentlessly pounded the area. Terry found himself braving the elements round the clock to gather cattle that had wandered too far from their designated areas. One late evening, while on horseback and in search of a prized Angus cow missing for nearly 24 hours, he had scoured the entire ranch, except for a dense woodland to the southwest that he was now approaching with determined curiosity. As he neared the cluster of trees, Terry's heart leaped with relief upon spotting unmistakable hoofprints deeply etched into the snow. He knew it wouldn't be long before he found the missing cow. Taking a moment to observe the tracks, he noted that the spacing between them suggested that the cow had been running full speed as she entered the tree line. This behaviour struck him as unusual, especially during a snowstorm. Cows rarely bolted like this unless they were fleeing from something. While it seemed unlikely that a predator would be hunting in such harsh weather, it wasn't entirely out of the realms of possibility. Yet Terry saw only one single set of tracks belonging to the cow. With determination, he followed the hoofprints for about 20 yards into the woods and soon reached a broad clearing. The tracks led to the centre of this open space, then abruptly stopped. The cow had seemingly vanished into thin air. A shiver ran down Terry's spine as he remembered a similar occurrence when he followed that wolf that mysteriously halted, as if the animal had evaporated into thin air. He searched for a while longer, but began to lose hope. Eventually he turned back towards the homestead, his heart heavy. For Terry, his cattle was more than just his livelihood. They were a source of pride and affection, each one bred and raised with care. Losing even a single cow or bull was not only a financial blow, but also emotionally devastating. Over the course of the winter, many more prized cows and bulls would vanish in a similar inexplicable manner. Determined to uncover the mystery, Terry spent many nights outdoors, moving stealthily through the property like a paranoid ninja. He hoped to catch whoever or whatever was responsible in the act. Unfortunately, no matter how silently he crept towards them, these lights that became commonplace on the land, well, they always managed to evade him, retreating as if they knew when he was closing in, almost as if from a distance they could sense that he was there. Things continued to get weird on the Sherman Ranch. We've all heard of cattle mutilations as it pertains to UFO sightings, right? Well, in this case, what would happen is Terry and his wife would often discover cattle vanishing as if into thin air, then reappearing at some point later in crazy locations. The unsettling pattern continued as the cattle began to reappear, often in some gruesome states. Some were discovered lifeless with no discernible cause of death, while others bore extensive and perplexing mutilations. These mutilations were nothing short of bizarre. Enormous sections of flesh and skin had been meticulously carved out, leaving behind eerie scenes of macabre precision. Strangely, there was an utter absence of blood. These wounds bore the unmistakable signature of precision instruments, evoking an eerie surgical quality that sharply contrasted with the brutal, haphazard violence typically associated with predator attacks. Throughout 1995, the Shermans were really stressed about these weird things happening. The strange stuff just kept getting crazier. Almost every night these mysterious lights would show up over the ranch. Inside the house they experienced more spooky stuff, like things moving around on their own. They even saw strange dark figures looking in through the windows and sometimes coming into the house and standing by their beds at night. There were weird noises coming from the ground, like machinery or trains running underground. Even their neighbours heard it. There was also something you couldn't see, but you could tell was there. Like, the animals would move out of the way as if something big and invisible was running through them. And in the nearby creek, it was like giant invisible feet were stomping through the water. They even saw a smaller creature that seemed to have some kind of cloaking device, like that movie Predator. They also spotted orange lights in the sky that were different from the usual ones Terry saw moving around in the distance. The first time Terry saw one of these weird things, he was chilling on his porch on a warm summer's night. Suddenly, something showed up in the sky about a mile away. He had his rifle scope nearby, so he grabbed it to check it out. What he saw left him completely stunned. There was this orange thing that looked like some kind of doorway, and in the middle of it he could see blue sky. Even though it was nighttime, it seemed like it was a portal to somewhere else. After that, these strange things started happening more often above the ranch. Terry said that he saw weird shaped crafts going in and out of these portals a few times. But the creepiest stuff of all was the orbs. They didn't show up as much as the lights or portals, but when they did, they were super obvious. They would zip in and out of the trees and mess with the animals. Most of them were about the size of a tennis ball and had a strange blood red colour. But sometimes there was larger blue ones, and those were trouble. Terry and Gwen came to call them blue meanies. These blue orbs would make people feel an overwhelming sense of pure dread if they got too close to them. Maybe because of some weird signal they gave off. Terry and Gwen were really afraid of these blue orbs, more so than anything else they had experienced on the ranch. One evening, Terry was sitting on his porch like he always did, looking out at the night sky and waiting to spot any strange lights on his property. Then, something weird happened. He saw a creepy blue glow coming from the trees in front of his house. Instantly, he felt on edge. Out from the trees came this big blue orb, and it started moving towards him. Terry had his 3 best hunting dogs right there with him, and as soon as they saw the orb, they started growling and barking. Without thinking, Terry let them loose, and they chased the orb back into the trees. The strange thing was that whatever scared people, well, didn't seem to scare the dogs. Terry felt a bit relieved, like he won a small victory. But then out of nowhere, there were these 3 painful yelps from the dogs, and then silence. Terry waited for a couple of hours, but his dogs never came back. He was too scared to go out and look for them that night, but the next morning he and his son went to search where they had last been seen. On the ground, they found 3 strange piles of flesh that looked like they had been burned. It was all that was left of Terry's 3 dogs. This was the last straw for the Sherman family. They'd been through so much in the past 2 years that they couldn't sleep. The kids were struggling at school. Gwen lost her job at the bank, and the whole family had to sleep in the same room because of the weird things that were happening around and inside the house at night. In addition to everything else, they had lost 14 cattle and some beloved pets. Now, they were almost broke. When Terry had previously told a local newspaper about the weird stuff happening on the ranch, people made fun of them. But then other publications started talking about it. By chance, a self-made billionaire called Robert T. Bigelow heard about it. See, he had put a lot of money into a science team that investigated weird stuff. He offered to buy the ranch from the Shermans, who were really happy to say yes. So by July 1996, Terry and his family had left this place, and Bigelow's team, called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, were all set to move in by the September. They stayed there for nearly 10 years, looking at all the strange goings on and weird things that happened. They had their own stories to tell. What they found was just as weird and terrifying as what that family had gone through.